All right. Well, we get to talk about Song of Solomon tonight, and it's a good thing I guess there's teenagers in here. That'll be good. And it is. Oh, that's right, because Pastor JB's not here. Duh. I was like, why are there teenagers in here? It would be God's providence that we would talk about Song of Solomon the night the teenagers are in here. Um, we will be as what's what I'm looking for as veiled as Solomon is. So Solomon tends to talk in veiled language, and we'll not be explicit because that's not the purpose of the book. It is for the reader to understand those things, and hopefully as people are married, they understand those things. Hopefully when they're not married, hopefully it is veiled, because innocence is still a good thing. If you want to talk to someone about innocence, ask Ruth about how the 1950s and 60s were, and she'll tell you how innocent she was back then and how innocent life was. When was that? How old are you again? Oh, you're only 9 years younger than my parents? Wow. She really is a mother to me then. She can't be a grandmother because she's barely older than my own parents. So she would have been 39 when I was born. She really cannot be my grandmother unless you had a bunch of teen pregnancies, in which case maybe. But that doesn't seem like Ruth. So, there was an age of innocence back then where if someone read this, they'd have no clue what they were reading. But of course, as you're more mature, you read this and you have every understanding of what you're reading. And clearly, it can't just be an allegory. And so we'll look at some of this tonight and hopefully glean some wonderful things from it about God's design for marriage and the marriage relationship and God's desire for all of us. Because if not all of us will, we all likely will at some point either have been married or will be married. And so these things are clearly for us and a benefit to our lives. It shows an ideal marriage. But again, this is a marriage that seemed to actually exist, so it's not just an ideal marriage. This is a marriage that anybody can have. So God's not just giving us a standard that we can't reach. God is giving us what should be the norm for married life, but I would say nowadays is often not the norm because people have all their own opinions about marriage. And when you do things based on how you think something should work instead of reading the manual and doing what the manual says, well, don't be shocked when life doesn't go the way you hope. And so that's what Song of Solomon's all about. So we'll look at this tonight. Let's pray, though, and we'll get started. Father, thank you for the grace that you give us. And Lord, how we have the privilege to delve into your word and see what your will is concerning marriage. Lord, how this book does, in a way, typify Christ and his church. Ultimately, though, it does give us a literal view of what marriage should look like and what marriage should be like. And while it's full of euphemisms and things that are often veiled until someone has those things awaken in their hearts and lives, Lord, there is still much to glean here about preparing for marriage as well as life after marriage. And Lord, we ask that you would help everyone in this room to glean something from it, for our youth to understand the importance of waiting until marriage and not awakening certain things in their own hearts and souls until that time, but also those that are married to realize how important it is to keep maturing in their marriage and not just really living on the love of the past, but Lord, that their love would be something that endures and would last the way that you've intended. Lord, we thank you for the love that you have for us, the commitments you've made to us. Lord, how you yourself have in a way courted us to yourself and made us in a way that you've matured us into love for you because you first loved us. And we thank you for the grace that you give. Help us to look at your instructions about what a wonderful song of marriage can be. And Lord, that we rejoice in our own marriages and have a song to sing about what you've blessed us with. And I ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Solomon is the wisest man to ever live. So what a better man to talk about marriage than Solomon, at least for the first 20 years of his adult life. Solomon, for the first 20 years of his adult life, will, of course, have a very good marriage. Maybe not a sanctioned marriage by God. He's going to marry the daughter of Pharaoh, and there's always debate with people about whether or not that was an appropriate thing for him to do. But you'll find that he's married to her for about 20 years, and then he seems to then start to multiply wives after he's married to her. And so after 20 years, that's when he starts to decline. He starts to multiply wealth and wives and chariots and all these things. And you start to see a decline in his own spirituality, in his own life, in his own marriage, because he neglects the important thing, which of course is his relationship with the Lord. But at the beginning of his time, of course, he seems to write this song. Some people will take it to think that Solomon wrote the song late in his life. I think he writes it early in his life. because people will look at the mention of a harem and they'll say, see, he must have had a harem, but he's trying to say that this woman is better than what a harem could ever offer him. And he's trying to say that he would never want to marry anyone else, which is why it's kind of sad where he ends up once he abandons his love for God. But when someone has a true and right relationship with God, this is what marriage should be, right? Nothing can compare to a biblical marriage and a proper marriage when it's dealt with in its proper context. And so this woman's going to be called the Shulamite, which is actually a way to have Solomon's name, but as a feminine version of Solomon's name, because she's going to be his completion. That's what Solomon means. It means peace, wholeness, completion. And so you'll have completers of two halves. You'll have the male completer and the female completer who will come together. And so Solomon is from Shulamah, which is the masculine name for Shalom. And Shulamit will be the feminine name for Shalom. And those two halves will have this completion of each other because that's God's ordaining from the beginning, right? Those two shall become one flesh. And so it's interesting that even in God's providence of this book, it's the title he's going to give to Solomon's wife is the Shulamite woman, right? The woman that completes Solomon. And so she's going to be the other half to his half, and together they will complete each other, which is what we call complementarianism. Right, to complement someone is to complete them, to make them whole, to make them what they should be. And it's not saying that if someone never gets married, they're somehow lacking on God's will for their lives, but it is very normal for the majority of people to seek marriage and to find in marriage a completion for themselves where it does teach them much about who they are. In fact, I often say and believe there's almost nothing more sanctifying in life than getting married. And then next to that, there's almost nothing more sanctifying than having children, because those two things will show and teach you more about God than almost anything else you will ever encounter in life. In fact, even tonight, we were having problems with our boys, like all day long. It was just one thing after another after another. They would not listen, no matter what you did. You could discipline them. You could make them go lay on their bed. You could do whatever you chose to do to get them to obey, and it just seemed one thing after another after another after another. Right before we left for church, my wife looked at me and she said, "Is this how God feels about us?" And I said, "Yep, this is exactly how God feels about us." And then she looked to heaven and she said, "Thank you for not striking us down." And then we left for church. Because, again, these things teach us about God. In a way, they do complete us in a very special way, because marriage teaches you what sacrificial love really looks like. You get married, you think life is going to be ideal, and then you get married and you realize it's not. In fact, it's one of the things I often warn people when they get married is marriage is not all that it is chalked up to be. You'll get married and you'll end up being very disappointed in all sorts of things. You'll end up being disappointed in what you expect your spouse to do, where you expected to be in life. Marriage is full of disappointments. But clearly, that's not the focus here. The focus here is on a much more positive thing. But you'll find is people tend to focus on negative things in their marriage, which is why they're so unhappy. Solomon's going to take a different approach where he's going to focus on much more positive things, which will give him a very fruitful marriage for at least 20 wonderful years before he starts to turn his heart from God, and then, of course, it will change. But there is a historical focus to this book, because it happens in history just like every other book. The human author, of course, is Solomon. I do think that he writes this book probably for the daughter of Pharaoh. He's going to mention even Egyptian things here. He'll talk about Pharaoh's chariots and things, and so it kind of makes sense that if he's referencing things from Egypt, it makes sense that his wife is probably from there. Otherwise, she would have no clue what he's talking about if he's referencing things such as Pharaoh's chariots. Pharaoh doesn't just bring his chariot to Jerusalem and do a drive-by and say, "Look at my new GM chariot over here," right? Okay, that's not what Pharaoh's doing. Pharaoh hangs out in Egypt, which means this is likely the daughter of Pharaoh. Plus, even the things that she'll describe herself with, right? She'll talk about how her skin is dark and she's ashamed of it. Because in that day, of course, just like if you go to the East today, most women are ashamed of dark skin, because dark skin means that you're what class? You're low class, because you're out in the sun, right? Because if you're out in the sun, then you're low class. That's why you see in Chinese culture, they all powder their faces white. Why? Because, well, we don't have to go work. We don't have to do those things. We don't have to be in the sun. And so it was considered low class in a lot of those cultures to have darker skin. Well, if you're from Egypt, you're naturally probably a darker complexion than those that are in Israel. In fact, you see most Israelites today, they have an olive skin, but they're rather white compared to many things, whereas those in Egypt are much more of a darker Arab complexion, even just how those genes meet out over the years. And so this woman, if she is coming from Egypt, she already has the complexion of what would have been essentially a servant class, and she's going to be the queen. And so you can see the shame that she would have just in her appearance where she's going. Whereas in Egypt, I'm sure she would look much higher elevated, much higher status. But because of where she's going with marriage and Solomon, it seems to be the case. And that's why I really do think that this is probably Pharaoh's daughter. Plus, it really muddies the beauty of marriage if this is just one woman of many. Marriage is not intended to be one woman among many. God intends marriage to be one man, one woman, one lifetime, and there are no caveats to that. That is God's intention. And so for God to have this ideal marriage on display and then have it really be just one woman among many, which is really what Solomon goes against here. He's going to talk about how she's the lily among the thorns, right? Because the women are the thorns and she's the lily, right? He doesn't even notice them. They're just trash. They should just be burned up. He can't care about them. He loves her because he shows what real love looks like, which means very clearly, I don't think that he was just living in his harem days. Because in his harem days, even statistically, he'd have to marry like 20 women a year or 30 women a year just to reach the numbers that he does. I mean, he does that for 20 years. He has 1,000 wives and concubines. So you do 1,000 divided by 20. That's 50 marriages or concubines a year. I don't think that you just look at one and say, you're the lily among the thorns, okay? He seems to have a lot of thorns, and he doesn't seem too worried about it by that point. So for those reasons, I do think this is earlier on in his reign. Plus, there's too much godly wisdom here for this to be in the middle of his own sin. Beyond that, the audience clearly is the nation of Israel. God is trying to show them what a wise marriage looks like. And again, there's a lot of wisdom here about how husbands speak to their wives and how wives respond to their husbands. There's a key structure to the book. There's kind of 4 groupings. First, you see the beauty of courtship. So in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 5, you'll find they're not married yet. They're kind of awaiting the marriage ceremony, and that's why in chapter 3, verse 6, you'll see Solomon show up with his men and their entourage, and he's going to get married. And then, of course, you see them get married and their marriage relationship and how all of those things convey over time, how they are initially very enamored with each other in marriage. It sounds pretty normal, called the honeymoon period. And then eventually, of course, there's some denial in the marriage, and Solomon's like, well, forget you. That's what all men do when they're denied, and gets up and says, well, I'm not going to bother. And then the woman's like, well, where'd he go? What's going on? And so you kind of see a very normal marriage as the marriage starts with its courtship, moves to its wedding celebration, moves to its own maturity. Like I said, Solomon's going to initiate his own marriage relationship with his wife, and she's going to basically ignore him and give all these excuses and all these things. And Solomon walks out. And of course, that's when she says, where is my beloved gone? Where'd he go? And if you've been married for any length of time, men know what it's like to desire their wives and be told no. And women know what it's like to tell their husbands no and then wonder, well, where'd he go? And the almost defeating feeling that gets of, am I not good enough now, right? Now that I don't want to give you something, am I not good enough now? And that's kind of where she is. Where'd he go? What's going on? And you'll find by the end of it, there is a restoration, and a restoration to a place where she looks at it and says, if my husband's desire is for me, and then what she does is then she invites him and says, well, how about you, right, let's come away. Let's do these things. Why? Because she's realizing maturity in marriage is not just having your husband pursue you. It's also the inverse of you then decide to pursue your husband, because his desire should not just be for you. Your desire should be for him. And there's growth in all sorts of areas with this. You see with Solomon and his words. You'll find men, when they mature in their marriage, they tend to not try as hard. What you find of Solomon is he's still saying the same words that he said to her when he was courting her. He still behaves in a very similar way. Why? Because the capstone of marriage, right, that sexual relationship does not just happen because it happens and you're married, right? There is always that build up to that moment, and so he's always going to build up that moment with what? With words of affection, affirmation, his love for her, all these things. He's going to talk about her beauty and how wonderful she is. And he's going to do that over the period of their marriage. And what it's showing is it's showing a cycle of marriage. That what there is growth in marriage. There are husbands that continue on pursuing, and there are wives that mature enough to realize, okay, I can also see his desire for me and love him too, and respond to what he is trying to do. And I know that people don't like conversations like that because we all like to live vindicated on the internet nowadays, where the internet says, hey, if your husband, if he just wants sex and he's just a pig and he's just this and he's just that, I hate to break it to people, but believe it or not, that is a natural desire of both sexes, whether they want to admit it or not. And for people to act like it's not normal, or as if people are somehow wicked for desiring sex. In fact, I saw a Catholic podcast, this is probably 6 months ago, where a woman said, men don't need sex to live, so I guess isn't that big of a deal. And her reason was, well, you won't physically die without it. By the way, you won't physically die if all you do is have to eat slop for the rest of your life either. Does that make life enjoyable if all you had to do was eat mush for the rest of your life? Could you live? Sure, but would you enjoy life? No. So don't devalue the sexual relationship because you don't have to have it to live. Okay, part of those things is what? It's the joy of life, right? It's the closeness of marriage, right? It's something you don't do with anybody else. I can have a conversation with anyone, by the way. I can literally go out these doors and talk with anyone, have a conversation. Clearly, that is not what constitutes a marriage. Right? There's something unique in marriage that you only do in marriage that you don't do with anybody else outside of any other part besides marriage. Which means, well, that clearly becomes a very important part of marriage, and what we've often done in churches is if we've devalued it and made it seem like if people want that, then there must be something wrong with them. Well, the reality is it's not wrong to want it, and best of all, they should want it with you because that's who they're married to. And what you'll find is you'll find people on both ends that act like, well, people, they shouldn't want this. This is wrong. Well, you have a moment where she doesn't want it, and she feels rejected and despondent, and she learns to grow and desire it. But you also see with him, he also learns to get over the fact that he was rejected and come back because, he's not just going to give up either. By the way, how many men give up on their marriage because their wives don't have a desire to be with them, and so they just give up. They stop trying. My goodness, there's whole online groups. In fact, I hate to say this, but there's like a whole Reddit group called Dead Bedrooms. You know what it is? It's a bunch of people talking about how they've given up even trying to have sex with their spouse. Why? Because every time they try, they're just told no. And what happens? They feel shame. They feel humiliated. They feel all these emotions, and so why even try? By the way, Solomon's going to feel those things, which is why he walks away. Can you imagine telling the king no? Or can you imagine being the king and being told no? And she's going to tell him no, and she's going to give him excuses. In fact, she's going to say, my feet are already washed, right? I can't sleep with you. I've already bathed. I'll feel dirty again. She gives all these excuses, and the Bible portrays him as trying and trying and trying, and she says no. And so he gives up and walks away. But again, this maturity is part of marriage. Of what? We realize that we are to desire each other regardless of our excuses, that we're to pursue each other even when we're denied. Why? That doesn't mean that we force someone into a sexual relationship, but we don't give up on the sexual relationship just because, oh no, I didn't get it the one time I tried, or the second time I tried, or the third time I tried. What's the point? This becomes a very important part of marriage, and so I'm trying to tell all of you is, yes, I understand life happens, I understand age happens, I understand people get old, or whatever else might happen in life, but the normalcy of life is that married people have sex, and that they have sex on a regular basis, and that this is a normal part of life. By the way, if you're a teenager, please don't get uncomfortable by the fact we're talking about sex, because one day you will grow up and get married, and this will be part of your life. Which means it's better for you to understand what sex, not necessarily what it is now, but to understand that it's an important part of life. And so, yes, we're all going to blush tonight, and we're all going to be uncomfortable. I remember going through this book in my biblical poetry class I took. In fact, for whatever reason, pastoral majors weren't allowed to take it because it was a block class. And biblical poetry covered Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. It was actually the best class I ever took in my bachelor's degree. The whole time I had to get a special permission to take the class because it was normally a block class for nursing students and education students. And I don't know why it was just for them. And so me and another pastoral major, we got special permission to take this block class and from the registrar, and we're sitting in it. I remember getting the Song of Solomon. And by the way, it was college days. And if you know anything about college days is when all the high school students show up to sit in class. And that's the first week in Song of Solomon. And Dr. Sleeth, he says, I'm going to make you uncomfortable. And he says, I want you to be uncomfortable. And he writes S-E-X, big letters all over the board. He says, in case you want to know what this book is about, this is what this book is about. And yes, there is a picture of Christ in this church here, but this is a real reality of what a healthy marriage is. So don't just spiritualize away what a healthy marriage is, because what you end up doing is you end up devaluing what really is the capstone of closeness. Again, I always say sex is kind of the cherry on top. It's the capstone. It's the pinnacle. And everything we do all day long in our marriage, from our compliments to how we treat each other, to even from when we initially start to date and court each other and try to woo each other into marriage, that's kind of the pinnacle, isn't it? Isn't that the pinnacle of affection, that we really love each other, which is why they call it making what? Making love, right? Because that's the pinnacle of love. And so the reality is, part of it is we need to realize that, yes, while we first get married, there's a lot of this excitement, but as we stay married, there is some maturity that comes part of the marriage bed and how we treat each other and how we expect things from each other, and to realize this is an important part of life. And by the way, I'll say this to you women, if you think that your husband is done having sex with you and you just haven't had sex in a long time, I hate to break it to you, he's probably not. And you need to mature in the fact that what? I should realize his desires for me and what? Go to him. Husbands, have enough maturity to realize, too, that marriage is not something you give up on just because you don't get sex. So what do? You keep pursuing your wife. Keep loving your wife. Marriage is not transactional. Okay? Marriage is a covenant, not a business contract. So what? You do your job anyways. You love your spouse anyways. And what you'll find here is that she loves him because he loves her. And there's your picture of Christ. Right? We love him because he first loved us. By the way, does Christ stop loving us because we don't give him what he wants? No. But by the way, isn't that relationship with Christ so much sweeter when we all live the way we should? Yeah. And then, of course, he ends with the nature of love. What is love? What is love like? He talks about how love is like a burning flame and how love can't be quenched by many waters and nothing can get rid of love, and how you can't buy love with money. By the way, don't people try to do that? Just look at all the rich people online. They're all trying to buy love with money. Why do you think all these 80-year-olds have 20-year-old wives? The 20-year-old's just praying, Lord, help him to die tomorrow so I can have his money. That's why you call them what? What are they? They're gold diggers, okay? They are nothing besides that, because all they want is their money. They don't love them. I don't care what you say. There's no way, okay? We all know why they got married. And so love can be bought with money, all sorts of things of that nature. But, of course, this is set in the kingdom of Solomon near the beginning of his reign. And again, God is trying very much in this to display the truth of love and marriage, including the beauty, devotion, and purity of true marital intimacy and the growth that should accompany it throughout marital life. Because, again, you have to understand, even in Israel, sex is a taboo topic. In fact, Song of Solomon was part of what they call the Megaloth. The Megaloth was the books that were spoken against. And the reason was, it's too sexual to be in the Bible. It was too inappropriate to be in the Bible. And so you have these Jews, this is after Jesus comes and dies and is buried and rises again. Around AD 80 or 90 or so, there's a bunch of Jews that are now discussing, well, what should our canon be now all this has happened? And this was one of the books that was spoken against because, well, it's too sexual. It's too inappropriate. You can't even read it in public. And what they end up agreeing with is, no, this is meant to be read. Now, they allegorize it. They take away any true marriage view of it. It's like, oh, this is God and us, which, by the way, I'm not against saying that God loves us in the marriage relationship. The Bible says that he does. But don't take away from that and neglect the fact that this is also a real relationship when it comes to a human level between you and your own spouse. And so for us as God's people as well, Song of Solomon's written to us to show us the functioning of a healthy, God-ordained marriage, including true love that is accompanied by the beauty, devotion, and purity of true marital intimacy that should mature throughout marital life. Right? So God wants a love that is what? Well, true love. Not a fake love, not a bought love, not a love that just fizzles out tomorrow, right? A love that many waters can't quench, right? A fiery love, a passionate love, a love that's intoxicating is what he'll describe it as, right? Like he's drunk with love, right? A love that you can't get over. We used to call it infatuation. Right? How many of you are actually infatuated with your spouse? Right? Where you can't get over them. All you can do is think about them. And it's like, wow, I can't wait to see them. I can't wait for this. Can't wait for that. Why? There's that intoxication. By the way, if you've moved beyond that, it's time to go get drunk. Okay? Not in the bad sense where you get drunk to see the beauty again, okay? But right? You are enjoying the intimacy of what marriage is supposed to be. By the way, anyone can have a good marriage. I'm not ignorant to even misunderstand that there are people in our church that don't have good marriages. I'm very aware. I'm not ignorant. I know. You know why? I hear about it. They complain about it. They talk about what they'd rather have, what they'd rather want. The point of this book is you have what you have. And Solomon was supposed to just choose her. And by the way, once he starts choosing other things, look how his life falls apart. And so it's a God-ordained marriage, right? Because God puts people together. What God's joined together, let nobody put asunder. And again, it's accompanied by, right, the beauty, devotion, and purity of true marital intimacy. Again, marital intimacy is a very soft way of saying sex. Okay? There's beauty in proper marital sex. Why? Because it's the beauty of what? True devotion, innocence, right? Not being tainted by something else. Nobody else is allowed to be involved in it. By the way, isn't there something sweet about wedding days when you see a couple, they stand in front of each other, they're making vows, and we all kind of cry, remember the vows that you made. And I'm really excited for Emily and Ty to get married in a few weeks, and I'm hopefully not going to cry, because whenever I go to weddings, I just kind of sit there and I end up crying a little bit, and it's like, oh yeah, I did promise those things. Am I doing those things? That I did love my wife like this, so I still love her like this. Just the innocence of the moment. Why? Because there's beauty in innocence. By the way, the beauty of devotion too. Why? Because this is just for us. No one else gets to participate. No one else gets to be in on it. No one else gets to know. Why? Because it's the beauty of that marriage intimacy and that devotion there. And then the purity of it. Why? Because there is a purity in true marital intimacy. Why? Because you're married, one man, one woman, one lifetime, right? The marriage bed is undefiled. Right? There's a purity there. There's something there that there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. In fact, if you were to, that's meant to be crass, but if you were to be naked in any other part of society, we'd all look at you and say, put some clothes on. What's wrong with you? Why? Because it's not okay there, but there is something sacred about marriage. For what? It's okay to be very transparent and open and vulnerable. Why? Because there's something sacred about that relationship that would not be sacred anywhere else. And if it were anywhere else, we would say, you need to go be put in an insane asylum. What's wrong with you? All of those things. And by the way, the natural things that come from it. What's the natural result of marriage? Children. Okay, he's not going to talk about children here. Maybe that's why they're still so happy. Sorry. Oh, forgive me. Right? But there is that reality, though, that the focus is clearly them. Because even in marriage, if you're in love, believe it or not, the focus is not your what? It's not your children. The number one mistake people make in their marriage is their marriage becomes about their children and not about each other. Like, it's interesting how many couples statistically get divorced as soon as their last child graduates high school. You know why? They've lived their life for their kids, and they've forgotten what it means to love each other. So I hope tonight you'll take some moments and think and meditate, what is my marriage? Or, if you're a teenager, what do I want my marriage to be like? Because you need to have some realistic expectations of what life is like. Believe it or not, when me and Liz got married, our first 6 months of marriage were miserable. I was a seminary student. I was getting a Master of Divinity. I was top of my class. Everyone liked me, besides my wife. I remember going to bed at different nights and wondering, why do we do this? And also remembering, but we can't stop this now because now we've started this. Right? There was no going back. And so it came to this realization of 6 months of arguing and fighting and being annoyed at each other. Why? Because we both had expectations of each other that were unrealistic, right? I thought my wife would just, do everything. Yeah, joke is on me. And she thought that I would be reasonable. Joke was on her. Okay. Why? You have two people that are very different, who, by the way, it's very easy to live apart. But once you have to live with each other, do you know how you feel about your brother and sister that you live with all the time and how you want to kill them sometimes? That's marriage, but to another degree, okay? Why? Because now you get to live with this person, and you get to interact with them, and you don't just get to go away. In fact, we lived in a 400-square-foot apartment, and our bed, we called it a marriage counseling bed because it divoted in the middle, and no matter what you did, you met in the middle. Even when you were mad at each other, it's like you just couldn't get away from each other. And what was God doing? God was constantly teaching us what? It doesn't matter how you feel in your marriage. You get to love each other anyways. Even if at one moment you think, why did we do this? By the way, I think we both had those thoughts. Why did we do this? By the way, I love my wife. I think we have a great marriage today. But it didn't come without moments of deep heartache and deep hardship. We didn't have the honeymoon period. Maybe that's the mantra of my life. I didn't even have a honeymoon period when I became the pastor here. There was no honeymoon period anywhere. Maybe I just don't get honeymoon periods, okay? But there was no honeymoon period. It was just a battle, and we learned what? We learned to love each other anyways. And by the way, that's what you see here too. What? They both have expectations of what the other should do. He thinks his wife should just have sex with him. She says no. So what happens? They have to learn to what? Work through it anyways. Love each other anyways. And to see what true marital life is all about. There's covenant focus in this book too. There's really just two covenants that become paramount. First, the Davidic covenant, and that's clear because Solomon's the one writing. And he's seen in here as the king of peace who's continued to fulfill the covenant in his marriage. Why? Because he's going to have children from his marriage. And it's going to continue on, what? A kingly line of children throughout his marriage. And so that becomes part of it as well, as the Davidic covenant is carried on through a covenant like marriage. There's going to be many marriages that occur to produce, ultimately, of course, Jesus Christ when he comes, because Mary will be the one that's the culminated in that final marriage where she is born, and of course she will be the one through whom Messiah will come. And the same with Joseph, where he will be a righteous man from a godly marriage, where he will handle Mary the correct way, and of course he will raise the Lord to do what he should, because he's a righteous man. Second of all, we see the new covenant as well. New covenant is pictured through faithfulness and is seen and exhibited throughout the song by showing an everlasting love that can't be broken. Again, in chapter 2, verse 16, you'll see this as a repeated phrase throughout the book. She'll say, "My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feedeth among the lilies." Right? So there's this devotion here. There's this idea of ownership here. And by the way, this is before they're even married. There's already kind of this idea that, there's this exclusivity, and they're not even quite married yet. They're maybe in the betrothal period. Maybe that's maybe a little bit more why there's some of this ownership here. But still, they're kind of awaiting marriage still, and so there's still this idea of we're exclusive. And that's what you find, too, in life even nowadays. Again, by the way, for you those that are teenagers, if you're just dating a bunch of people at once, then you're not really being fair to someone. If you're going to be called boyfriend and girlfriend, and you're going to act like boyfriend and girlfriend, then you shouldn't be dating other people. But if you want to just go on and hang out with people, that's fine. But once you are exclusive, there is this idea of exclusivity because you're training yourself for marriage. If you're going to behave like everyone else is a throwaway and not act faithful in your minor relationships, just wait till you get married and have to act faithful then. Because, again, you're preparing yourself in how you treat every relationship. And then in chapter 6, verse 3, in a very similar thing where she will go on and say, "I am my beloved's. My beloved is mine. He feedeth among the lilies." And then chapter 8, verse 7, she will also there talk about her husband's love for her. And again, this portrays the new covenant. It's not just ownership, but it is a everlasting love. It says, "Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it." And again, if a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would be utterly be contemned. Why? Because you can't buy love. But it shows you what kind of love God has for us. We don't have to buy God's love. God freely gives his love because God is love. And by that's the amazing thing with God's love. You can't earn it. You can't purchase it. You can't deserve it. And that's the whole point of love. There's no transaction to take place in love. Love by nature is unconditional. It by nature is transactionless because it is something that you cannot buy. It is something that you already have. And so God in his love for us, he's not looking for a transaction. He's not looking for us to somehow pay off what he has done for us, because you can never pay it off. Now, he is wanting us to love him, clearly, but even then, that's a choice, isn't it? Does God force anyone to love him whom he loves? No, he loves the whole world. Yeah, he doesn't force anyone. But in his love for the world, of course, he gives his son. And in Jeremiah 31:3 in the New Covenant, of course, there it talks about how God has loved us with an everlasting love. And so, again, it very much correlates to that. There's a spiritual focus, we'll spend the majority of our time because this book is much more focused on a good marriage and what it looks like than anything else that it pictures. So first, we see some moral themes here in this book. First, that sexual relationships are expected to only be enjoyed in a monogamous marriage, and single believers should be careful of arousing such sexual desires before its appropriate time. In Song of Solomon, chapter 3, verse 5, the Shulamite woman, right, this completer of Solomon, even she warns of this before her wedding. In verse 5, as she's awaiting Solomon to appear and she's awaiting for the wedding day to happen, she says, "I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up nor awake my love till he please." And what she's saying here, when she says my love, she's not talking about Solomon, because love here is feminine. So she's talking about this love within herself, this arousal, this really sexual desire for these women in her entourage not to awaken something that she can't fulfill. And she says, till he please. Why? Because she's waiting for him to come on the wedding day and do what? To finally arouse what's been sleeping. And again, be very careful if you're single of arousing sexual desires that you can't fulfill. You're just making your life harder. Again, there's a reason the Bible warns about how men and women behave before they're married. Also, a reason why I think people date way too long nowadays. Because again, what you're doing over time, you delay stuff long enough, you're just making your life harder. Because even Paul will say, he says it's better to marry than to burn. And burning there is not going to hell, by the way. It's a burning with passion. Why? Because it's an unfulfilled desire. By the way, the Bible says, hope deferred maketh the heart sick, right? You have something you want and you can't have it. Guess what it does to you on the inside? It makes you sick. By the way, In the same way, when people do live in sexless marriages, that's also a feeling that is very similar, which is why sexless marriages, by the way, are sin. Right? 1 Corinthians 7 makes that very clear. When it comes to spouses not trying to what? Fulfill their marital duty is what he's going to portray it as there, right? You give to your spouse what is theirs, right? They have authority over your body. You have authority over theirs. There is this understanding in marriage. You don't just get to say no because you, for whatever reason, don't like your spouse in the moment. By the way, there's almost nothing better for you to make up in life than to go sleep with each other. I know we're being very blunt here, okay? But the reality is that's what brings you close. Which means if you want to make things right, yes, you confess and make things right, but the way that you kind of seal the deal of making things right is what? Go to bed. Why? Because you're making this reality of trying to what? Show that you've had true restoration. Why? Because you're willing to be close again. And so here, again, she's going to warn against this being true of single people and being aware of it. And so, by the way, again, if you're single, be very careful about arousing things that you have no business arousing. You're just frustrating yourself. That includes things such as pornography. That includes things such as inappropriate touching before you're married. That includes, I would even say, trying to have these really long, drawn-out dating periods, which is why I often say I don't think high schoolers should date. You know why? You're wasting your time. You know why? You can't do anything about your desires. When you turn 18, guess what? Whether or not mom and dad say yes or no, guess what you can go do? You don't get married. Now, I think you should have your parents' blessing, and that's wise and good. But you can at least do something about what? All the desires that you have within your heart. Which means before you're 18, I think it's very foolish for people to date because I think you're just wasting your time, and you're also setting yourself up for your own heartache and your own hurt. And by the way, to have desires that you cannot fulfill. And by the way, probably for a person that you won't fulfill them with anyways. Because, believe it or not, high school relationships don't usually last. I hate to break it to you. Second of all, faithfulness in marriage is expected because of the inherent ownership married couples have upon, this is supposed to say one another. It says upon another. They're really on top of each other. It is a book all about that. But upon one another, Song of Solomon 2:16, again, she's going to say here, we've already read this verse, but just to reiterate this idea of ownership, she says, my beloved is mine, I am his. Right? There's this expectation of inherent ownership in marriage. The same with chapter 6, verse 3. We read that already. I am my beloved is mine, right? Because there's this ownership. 1 Corinthians 7 makes that abundantly clear. When you're married, your body is not yours, it's your spouse's. And your spouse's body is not theirs, it's yours. Which implies that there's this expected faithfulness, right? You don't just get to go sleep with anybody because they're not yours. Again, it's why Solomon will say in Proverbs, he says, drink from your own well. You have your own well. You don't need somebody else's. And by the way, they shouldn't be drinking from your well. You have your well. You should protect your well. And by the way, men, you shouldn't same with women, I guess nowadays, you shouldn't let someone just butt their way into your marriage and give up. It's your well. Protect it. And then beyond that, don't go into anything but your own well. It's your well. Enjoy it. God has given you that. Those are moral themes because those two issues are issues of morality. What? Not trying to arouse a desire you can't fulfill before you're married because what? It will lead you into sin. And also this idea of faithfulness in marriage because anything that's not faithful is sin. And so God expects both these realities to be true. We also see kind of the big picture of marriage, not a ton of theological themes, but this is predominant. Marriage is a God-ordained institution in which a man and a woman complete each other. Again, this is evidenced in these names. Solomon, again, it's the masculine name of Shalom, and Shulamite is the feminine name of Shalom. They are two halves that necessarily complete one another in body, soul, and spirit. And again, this is biblical complementarianism. Again, when I say body, soul, and spirit, because Song of Solomon, believe it or not, is not just sexual. You'll find things in Song of Solomon that are things that appease the soul, that appease the spirit. Right? They're going to talk about how beautiful each other are, right? How they love them and nobody else. Okay, that's not something you just say during sex. Okay, that's something that you're saying to show your love, your exclusivity, right? You're showing your loyalty, and that has nothing to do with sex. What shows you marriage is more than just sex. Marriage is what? This completeness in spirit, this completeness in soul, where what? You're complementing each other, you're giving each other what others lack. In fact, again, she's ashamed of her own skin tone, but you'll find with Solomon, let's go to chapter 1. You'll find with Solomon, he's going to basically negate those things. Again, she says, I am black, but comely, she says, as the Tents of Kedars, curtains of Solomon, look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. And again, she says, tell me, O thou whom my soul loveth, where thou feedest, where thou makest thy flock to rest, and all these things. And he's just going through all these things. And in verse 8, his response says, if thou know not, O thou fairest among women, go thy way by the footsteps of the flock and feed the kids beside the shepherd's tents. I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Why, what is he doing? She says, I'm ugly. And he says, no, you're not. You're like Pharaoh's chariots. You're like this. Your nose is like the watchtower, right? Your eyes, he's going to compare her eyes to kind of like the gleaming ocean, right? He's going to talk about her beauty and how you're not ugly. You're not a throwaway. And then she'll say in chapter 2, she says, I am the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys, right? I'm just one among many. And then in verse 2, he's going to reply, which, by the way, it's very important that if you're going to read Song of Solomon, you understand who's speaking. Okay? I understand a lot of times Bibles won't put that. There are some translations that will put man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. It's very helpful as you're reading through the book. So even if you don't use modern translations as a matter of your study, that's an appropriate way to look at the headings and see who's speaking, because then you know who's responding to what. His response is, as the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters, right? And what he says is that, right, you're the lily among the thorns. They're just thorns. You're the lily. You're this beautiful thing, right? My love among the daughters. You're my love. And among them, right, they're just a bunch of thorns, and you're this beautiful flower in comparison. Why? Because what he's doing is he's also completing her and what? Her soul and her spirit, right? Complementing her where she, what? Is emotionally distraught, emotionally feels like she's can't fulfill anything, like she's somehow not worthy of his love. And what is he doing? He's building her up in those areas. Also, again, marriage is definitely a completion of body, soul, and spirit. You'll find of women tend to complete a man emotionally, and men tend to complete a woman logically. Not to say that women are inherently illogical, but believe it or not, women are much more emotional than they are logical, and men are much more logical than they are emotional. And a good marriage does what? It makes you rational by being both logical and emotional. The same reason women, they get this pit in their stomach when they know something's wrong, and men can't understand why. And they'll say, I just feel off about that person. And for whatever reason, they're right. My wife has never not felt off about someone and been wrong. She's always right. Why? Because there's just something emotional about her that she just knows. There's no logic behind it. But then there's times, too, when my wife has a lot of emotional arguments, I say, well, here's why we're going to do this. Why? Because, okay, in this context, that is not the right answer, right? The emotional argument's not a good answer here. Here's what we must do. Why? Because what it does, it brings two people that need the balance of the other together to what? Completion. That's why God says in Genesis 1, he says, or Genesis 2 specifically, he says, it's not good for man to be alone. That's why we call it complementarianism, right? We're completing each other. It's the other half to our creation. And so again, woman is from man. I like what Matthew Henry says, right? She's from his side, right? To what? To be equal to him. She's under his heart to be loved by him. And he goes through all these things about where woman is taken from and how she's to be cherished by her husband and loved by her husband and cared for by her husband, but it's part of him. And by the way, that's the point of marriage is what? You are now two becoming one. Physically, it's complementarian. Why? Because A can only go with B. So homosexuality cannot work. It cannot be marriage because there's no completion there. Right? Those parts cannot go together. In the same way in the soul and the spirit, how God has made us differently, we tend to come together and what? We make the other whole. We make it what it should be, which is why I say marriage is one of the most sanctifying things you can experience because it will teach you more about how God sees you than almost anything else. And so it's, yes, your soul, how people view you, but also your spirit and your relationship with God. But then spiritual themes. This is where the majority of the book spends its time is just kind of giving us spiritual principles of life and marriage. First, we see at the very beginning of the book that the foundation of marriage is not sex. And the reason we know that is, believe it or not, at the beginning of the book, they're not married. And they're not having sex, which shows you the foundation of marriage is not sex. But it's a love for one another that sees beauty that we don't even see in ourselves, evidence in the words of affirmation we give one another. Again, we've read these verses a little bit where she says, right, I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. Tell me, O thou whom my soul loveth, where thou feedest, where thou makest thy flock to rest at noon. For why should I be as one that turneth aside by the flocks of thy companions? So again, she's saying very clearly, I'm not beautiful. I'm not these things. And what's he going to do? He's going to what? Affirm her. Because by the way, it's kind of what dating is, isn't it? When you're dating, you're saying all the nice things you love about each other. They had this conversation with Ty and Emily. I said, you guys can have a moment of sweet nothings in your marriage if you want, but those aren't vows. Vows are different than sweet nothings. When people say their vows nowadays, it's a bunch of sweet nothings, but I love your hair, and I love your eyes, and I love your smile. I love how you're just so kind and hardworking. I just love these things, and so I love you. We're married now. Okay, that's not marriage, and those aren't vows. Okay, those are sweet nothings. Fine to say at a wedding, but not vows. Again, a vow is, I have you from this day forward, better for worse, richer or poor, sickness and in health, till death do us part. Why? Because those have nothing to do with how you feel about somebody. That's the promise of marriage. But marriage usually has its foundation in what? All the sweet nothings, right? I'm ugly. You're not ugly, right? Oh, thou fairest among women, right? You're the prettiest of them all. There's no one prettier than you. There's no lily like the lily of you, right? You're the lily of the lilies. They're all thorns. Again, he says, I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Why? Because she's the cream of the crop. And Pharaoh doesn't just take out the worst horses. He gets the best. Right? So she's the best of beauty. And you could say she's black beauty, right? Because she's a horse. But, sorry, I couldn't help it. Thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels. Why? Because, again, you can imagine her cheeks probably being almost rose-colored. Why? Because of the sun. And so what happens? Well, her cheeks are almost like rubies, right? Thy neck with chains of gold. We will make thee borders of gold with studs of silver, right? And we'll make you what? More beautiful. Right? You're beautiful, I'll make you more beautiful. By the way, isn't that what marriage should be? A beautiful woman, if a woman's happy, she tends to be what? Even more beautiful because of what her husband does for her and how that love culminates. By the way, the same should be true of a wife with a husband. What? He should be more handsome and more comely. Why? Because of what she does for him. When you see two people that are always miserable, do they look beautiful? No. Is that what God wants for marriage? That you just look ugly all the time? No, God wants beauty. But beauty is best brought out when what? We affirm each other, we love each other in the right way. And so again, foundation of marriage is not sex, it's that beginning of what? A relationship of what? Loving each other. And by the way, love is usually first external before it's internal. Second of all, the steps to a healthy marriage start to see each other not as one among many, but as the only one that is desirable. Again, that's the point of chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. He says, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. I'm just one among many. What's so special about me? Hey, have you ever been asked that as a husband? Right? Why do you love me? And then you're like, oh, what do I say? How many of you husbands ever been stumped by that before? How many of you have a pre-planned, written out answer to make sure to say every time, to make sure you always say the right thing? I need to put that in my Apple Notes or something and just say, hold on, I know why I love you. You know? I memorized, yes. Right? What am I compared to everybody else? And that's when he says, right, as the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters, right? She's the lily, they're the thorns. Nothing can compare to her. In fact, they're nothing to her. They're just the refuse. They're just the trash. And so what is he showing? He's showing that to him, she's the only one that's desirable. In fact, you could say it this way, to him, she's the only one he has eyes for. Why? They're not even married yet. But what's the point? That devotion is building. That faithfulness and desire is building. Why? Because that's the culmination of the marriage bed then, right? Is that we've now made this commitment and now we're together. And then, of course, third, what you see as well is you see once married, sexual desire should be regularly fulfilled as the capstone of a healthy marriage. Again, in chapter 4, verses 8 through 11, yes, Song of Solomon's filled with different euphemisms. As people are married, they make more sense and more understandable, and they're meant to be euphemisms. Because really, those that don't understand it is rather innocent. They'd have no clue what's being talked about, but those that are married, they'd be like, that sounds like this. Because it is. Okay, that's the whole point of a euphemism, is that it's not really understood to the average person, but if you know what it's talking about, you're like, oh, I know what that is. And that's why this book is kind of a healthy book. God has a way of veiling something beautiful to where the innocent don't know what's being talked about, but those that do, they can what? They can learn what a good marriage is. And so he says in verse 8, come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me. So come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Ammon, from the top of Shinar and Hermon, from the lion's dens, from the mountains of the leopards. Thou hast ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. How fair is thy love, my sister, my spouse. How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all spices. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. A garden encloses my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, camphor with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all the trees of frankincense. Right? He just loves everything about her, right? He just loves her smells. He loves what she, not to be graphic, but what she tastes like, what she looks like. Everything about her is just intoxicating to him. There's nothing about her he doesn't like, right? She is just a full course meal that he just can't wait to have. Okay, that's kind of how he's describing her. It says, myrrh and aloes with all the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, come thou south. Blow upon my garden, that thy spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden and eat his pleasant fruits. Why? Because he's saying, let's have sex. And she says, okay. That's the whole point of the end there, right? Awake. Okay, you want to have sex. Let's do it. Why? Because that is a regular, healthy marriage. By the way, this is kind of still their honeymoon period, which is why they're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then you get to later on in the book, and what you find is that doesn't always happen. But I will say this is a normal thing in a healthy marriage. And by the way, when the later chapters happen, the point is it's supposed to be an anomaly, right? When his wife says no, or when he gives up and he walks away, that's not supposed to be what happens. And that's why it's presented that way, right? She's heartbroken, he's disappointed. The normal, healthy part of marriage is what? This is the capstone of what? Of life. And so sex is supposed to be a normal part of marriage. And again, I'm not old and wise enough to know when those things stop, but I am wise and old enough to know that, again, it's not like you should stop being affectionate just because you're old. It's not like life is over. You shouldn't just be separated, be like, well, that's their bed, they'll die on, I die on this bed, and whatever. Okay, that's not marriage. Marriage is your one flesh, which means don't make excuses in your marriage as to why you won't do what your spouse, by the way, probably desires. Okay, I won't say needs, because yes, can they live and not die? Sure. But the fact that your spouse really wants something, shouldn't you want to give them what their heart desires? And you often ask your spouse, what do you want for Christmas? What do you want for Valentine's Day? What do you want for this? What do you want for that? What about what they desire on a normal basis? And again, for husbands and wives, this should be a normal desire for both in a healthy marriage. Fourth, kind of to meter this a little bit, while sex is the capstone of the marriage relationship, it is always built up with affirming words of love and care that began at the start of the relationship. In Song of Solomon chapter 6, you often see him complimenting her. Again, why? Because men, you should not just expect to have sex because you want to have sex. The reality is it's what? You're building up to that moment. You're building up to what? To compliment and to love and to care for and to cherish. It's not like women just are like, wow, there's a bed there. Okay? The reality is these things are things that are built up to, things that are awoken, right? That's why love is being talked about as awoken. It's not like it just awakens once in your life, like, oh, wow, I'm old enough. I know what that is now. No, the whole point is what? This person now is what? Being turned on in a sense. But that's not just something that happens once. It's something that seems to happen over a period of time that what? He's encouraging this moment of life. So in verses 4 through 10, he says, thou art beautiful, O my love, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners. Turn away thine eyes from me, for they have overcome me. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Gilead. Thy teeth are as a flock of sheep which go up from the washing, whereof every one beareth twins, and there is not one barren among them. As a piece of the pomegranate are thy temples within thy locks. There are 80 queens and 80 concubines, and virgins without number. My dove, my undefiled is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of the one that bare her. The daughters saw her and blessed her, yea, the queen and the concubines, and they praised her. And again, as he goes on to verse 9, he says, who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners? Why? Because he's saying that he's something that she can't look away from. By the way, if you saw an army full of banners coming at your gate, guess what you would not do? You would not look away. That's his whole point, right? He just can't get enough of her. He just can't help but stare at her. Can't help but look at her. You used to call that eye babies, right? Making eye babies all the time. You just can't get enough of looking at her. What's he doing? What is he doing? He's building up to that moment. Men, you can't just expect your wife to want to be with you because you are somehow just a hunk of burning love. Okay? Women respond best to words. Which means what? You should compliment your wife. You should tell her she's beautiful. And by the way, maybe find a vocabulary as colorful as Solomon's. Instead of just saying the same things over and over and over again. I love you. Is that really going to be the thing that's like, wow, he said he loved me again. Wow. I've not heard that a million times. By the way, if you don't say you love her, then she'll think that you hate her, but so still say you love her. But what? Find ways to say, I just can't get enough of you. I can't help but look at you. Yeah, everything about you just enamors me. Everything about I just want to sit next to you. I just want to be close to you. I just want to be around you. I just want to touch you. I just want you. And with all those things, you're kind of building one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. Why? Because you're building up that expectation of, I love you. And because I love you, by the way, that is the way, I will say this, ladies, listen. The way your husband knows that you love him is because you want to be with him. By the way he's trying to show love to you is that he wants to be with you. Just because your husband doesn't know how to talk as well as Solomon, hopefully he'll learn by reading this book, doesn't mean that your husband doesn't love you. Like the fact that he keeps trying to what? Pursue you over and over again shows that he does greatly love you. That's how men show love. And again, I know people want to mock, and they'll say, again, who's the guy who wrote the 5 love languages? What's Gary Chapman? What an abominable book. You know why? Those 5 things aren't really the only 5 things, and what people do with it then is they make it seem like if you don't have certain things that you fit in, that something's wrong with you, okay? Because I've seen it go to those extremes. By the way, generally, it's helpful. But when it becomes your gospel Bible, it becomes very unhelpful. And so if men say that their love language is touch, you know what everybody says? Oh, that's a pervert. Oh, there's something wrong with him that it's touch. Believe it or not, most men, the way they show love is they touch you. The same reason your husband will grab your butt as he walks by you and wrap his arms around you and kiss you and do all those things. And by the way, the moment he stops is the moment you really should be worried. You know why? That's when he's given up. And so you shouldn't be annoyed that your husband wants to love you. If anything, you should appreciate that you have something that nobody else seems to have in our culture, which is a husband that loves him. 5th, while marriage is initially based on the husband pursuing the wife. Again, we read Song of Solomon 5. Actually, we didn't read chapter 5, but 5 verses 1 through 6, we see this. So let's look at this part, right? He is pursuing his wife. Again, you could say he's initiating the marriage relationship. He says, I am come into my garden, my sister, my spouse, right? So he's there with his wife. I've gathered my myrrh with my spice. I've eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I've drunk my wine with my milk. Eat, O ye friends, drink ye, drink abundantly, O beloved. I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, again, this is her speaking now, right? He says, I've come to the garden, right? I'm here to sleep with you. And she says, I sleep, but my heart waketh. It's like, what is going on? Okay, and if you're married, you've all been here, okay? Right? She's asleep, he's awake, he wants something, she doesn't. And so it says, well, it's the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled, for my head is filled with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night. I've put off my coat. How shall I put it on? And that's kind of what she's saying is, I don't have anything on. I need to wear something for this. Because for whatever reason, by the way, it's interesting. Even in Genesis, it's so funny with Jacob and Judah. Again, Jacob's deceived because his wife is veiled, so he sleeps with Leah. Judah's deceived because Tamar's veiled. He sleeps with Tamar. You think they take the veil off and realize what they're doing. But they both end up in weird relationships because of the veil. But it was pretty normal to have some sort of marital clothing in that day of some preparation and things that it wasn't just spontaneous, right? She wanted some preparation as to why she wants to be ready for this moment, and she does not feel comfortable in this moment the way that she currently is. And she says, I've washed my feet. How shall I defile them? Again, the old adage, I just took a shower. I don't really want to do that right now. I just took a shower. I feel clean. I don't want to feel dirty again. So what's she doing? She's giving him what? Excuses. Yeah, she's brushing him off. Which, by the way, men, does that feel good? Nobody wants to say. I will say, as a man, it does not feel good. It feels humiliating. It feels discouraging. It feels shameful. It feels like, why do I even try? Why even bother? And by the way, I don't care what man you are, you've all felt that hardness in your hearts where you're tempted to what? Why even try? Why even bother? Every time I try to show my wife I love her, she doesn't want anything to do with me. I don't even know if she loves me. I don't know if she likes me. I don't even know if she thinks I'm attractive. I don't know what she likes about me. You know why? Those are the things that go through men's heads when what? When they try to initiate and the woman says, no. And by the way, her excuses are kind of logical, right? Nowadays it'd be like, I have a headache, okay? And he'd say, here's some Tylenol, right? But my beloved put in his hand by the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him, right? So she is clearly knows what he's doing. I rose up to open to my beloved, and my hands dropped with myrrh, and my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handles of the lock. I opened my beloved. My beloved had withdrawn himself and was gone. Why? Because he's initially trying. She's not really said anything, and so he thinks, even though she's clearly kind of okay with it now, he thinks, well, she hasn't said anything besides her excuses, and I don't think it's going anywhere, and even though I've tried, I guess I'll give up. And guess what he does? He gets up, and he walks away. By the way, women, have you ever sat there after your husband's tried to do something with you, and you've said no, and you've wondered, why did you leave? Why don't you love me? Is all you want me for is sex? I guarantee you, you've all thought that. You've all wondered and said, what's the point? Is this all he wants? Doesn't he love me? And so she's going to spend the next chapter looking for him. Where'd he go? And so she's going to have these things of wondering what his love is, where he's going, what he's doing. And so they're going to have these questionings of each other, of wondering if either are committed to the other. Why? Because they try to have sex. He's into it. She's initially not. And then she kind of is into it, but he's already left. And so now they're both just confused. And by the way, if you've been married at all, you all have been there. And so here, it spends a chapter and a half of them both questioning the other's love. Which, by the way, is that pretty normal when sexual expectations are left not had? It's very normal. By the way, I want to encourage you, if you have those things enter into your mind, you're not alone. Believe it or not, this enters into every married person's mind. And so as it continues on here, what we see, though, is the maturity of marriage. Right? Maturity in marriage, because, again, the husband usually pursues, sometimes is confused and walks away. Maturity in marriage is often evidenced by a wife understanding her husband's desire for her and pursuing him when he feels neglected. Again, why did he walk away? He felt neglected. He felt shame. He felt disappointment. In chapter 7, when she finally finds him, guess what she does? She learns, again, I like what verse 10 says. She says, I am my beloved's. His desire is toward me. Guess what she finally realizes? He wants to be with me. By the way, that's what she learns to come and accept. Before she keeps saying, I am my beloved's, he is mine. But now she realizes, too, it's not just the fact that we own each other, it's the fact that he wants me. So what's her response? Well, come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Right? Let us go up early into the vineyards. Let us see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grapes appear and the pomegranates bud forth. Let's try. See what happens. By the way, in marriage, not meaning to be crass, I know there's teenagers in here, but again, set realistic expectations. Sex is not always what you expect it to be, so you should go into marriage understanding that sex is not always what you expect it to be. When you try to have sex sometimes, does it always work the way you expect? No. But she is saying here, let's give it a try. And by the way, they go, and what happens? The mandrakes give a smell at our gates, all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. Right? She's saying, I've waited for you. Let's do this. Why? Because that's the end of the maturity of marriage, is what? It's not just a wife that waits for her husband to desire her and initiate and do all these things. What is it? She knows he wants her, and so she does what? I'm going to give him what he wants. By the way, that's how you know you've come to a place of maturity, is you don't have to be the one that's always pursued. By the way, I will say, from a man's perspective, it gets exhausting being the only one that seems to want anything. And by the way, that's where Solomon is here. This is how men are biblically. And I don't care what man you are. This is how all men are. Okay? There's not a man that's not like this. So if you're a woman listening, this is what your husband wants. And if you're a woman listening, on top of that, what? Learn the other side of maturity, which is you don't have to be the one that's always pursued. Again, even Jesus Christ, John will say we love him. Why? Because he first loved us, which means at some point, who doesn't have to be the only one to pursue? Jesus Christ. By the way, if you're the only one that pursues, that's okay. That's your job as a husband or wife, but you don't have to be the only one. Part of maturity is what? You come to that full circle of relationship where you realize what the other wants and what? You decide to have a proper marriage relationship. Number 6, what we see in this book is true love can't be bought, yet once experienced, it can't be extinguished, being evidence in a faithful desire toward the other concerning their body, their soul, and their spirit. In Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verses 5 through 7. He says, "Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? Because I raised thee up under the apple tree, there thy mother brought thee forth, there she brought thee forth that bare thee. Set me a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath the most vehement flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would be utterly be contemned." And so again, here, you see very clearly that love, one, you can't buy it. That's the whole point of verse 7 at the end, right? A man can give all his wealth for it, but can you really buy love? No. You can basically buy a prostitute, but that's all that it is then. By the way, do men really want to be married to a prostitute? No, men want to feel loved. The same reason, in a sexual relationship, if you both aren't into it, it's really not a relationship. You know why? It can't be one-sided. That's not love. That's transaction. That's prostitution. And do you really think anybody wants to try to buy love? By the way, on the other side of that, women, your husband shouldn't have to buy things for you to want to fulfill his desire. That's prostitution. Yet do you see that in our culture? There's kind of an expectation that he needs to do this. He needs to bring you flowers. He needs to take you out. He needs to do that. By the way, is it nice for husbands to love their wives that way? Yes. But what happens if you become poor and he can't buy you flowers, and he can't take you out, and he can't do all those things? Do you somehow just say, well, you were supposed to do this. This was part of our agreement. This is how you make me feel special. I don't feel special anymore. At some point, all that matters is that you have each other. I think that's one of the reasons it's great to get married young, because you're poor and you're broke and you have nothing and all you have is each other, and you learn to love each other for each other because you realize what it means to have worse. And then you have better, and then you have worse again, and then you have better, and you have worse again. Why? That's the cycle of marriage. By the way, everything that happens in this book is the cycle of marriage, from the sexual relationship to the rejection to the restoration. That's marriage. That's how marriage always is. But what? We should want to live at the capstone of marriage, not just what? Wondering if we love each other, wondering if the other loves us, living in doubt, or what we do come back together. By the way, it's interesting that their doubt is fixed by what? By coming back together. That's the whole point of chapter 7. They doubt each other's love, and the fix to it is, let's come back together. Why? That removes all doubt that you love each other. Is what? You're willing to be with each other again. And so again, true love can be bought. But I like how he says it's like this unquenchable fire, right? Many waters cannot quench it. Why? Because true love doesn't go away. Again, by the way, 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, love never faileth. Whether it be prophecies, they shall fail. Tongues, they shall cease. Of course, he says very clearly, right? It does not fail. It will not go away, right? Love, faith, charity, or faith, hope, charity, these three, right? The greatest of these, those, charity. Why? It's the only one that lasts. It's the only thing that's eternal. So by the way, wouldn't you want to have that in your marriage? By the way, if you feel like you don't have that in your marriage, it's not like you can't have it. I know many people in our church that feel like my marriage is over. I don't love them. And we don't have a real marriage. We don't have a this. We don't have a that. Marriage just sucks. There is no reason why you can't what? Throw some fire on that marriage and have some passion. And by the way, where you have some maturity, where it's not just them pursuing you, but that you learn to reciprocate. Because by the way, it shouldn't just have to be them pursuing you. And if that's your attitude, one, I don't even know how you got saved in the first place. Because salvation is not just Jesus pursuing you. At some point, you turn around and say, yes. So at some point, really, how you got saved needs to come into your marriage. But it's the same reason I often say people are humble enough to get saved, but not humble enough to ask for help in other areas. It always amazes me the things in salvation we'll take, but we won't apply to other areas of life. So again, allow yourself to actually enjoy marriage. Your life is not over. There's no reason to be miserable for your life. Dave and Carolyn, I saw them yesterday. I don't know what it is when I see them. We always just cry. I think it's because they're old. But every time I think about burying Dave and Carolyn, I cry. I know it's going to be hard to do their funeral. But every time I see them, too, I also cry because they talk about their love. And it's like, man, what a sweet love. And when they first got married, they had nothing. In fact, it's funny. They're the only couple I know that their song is a Christian song. Their song is Great is Thy Faithfulness. And they've been singing it since their honeymoon because their honeymoon didn't go the way they wanted when they first got married. Back then, you wouldn't book a hotel. You would just go out with the cash you had and find what you could. And every hotel was full, which for your wedding night's not a great experience. And so what? They sang in the car, Great is Thy faithfulness, oh God, my Father. Why? Because what? Their hope deferred makes the heart sick, but whose purpose was it? It was God's. So what? They say God's faithful. Carolyn's been in a lot of pain. And what? Guess what they're singing in the middle of the night at 2 a.m? Great is Thy faithfulness, oh God, my Father. Right? There's no shadow of turning with Thee. What I have needed, Thy hand hath provided. Why? Because they've had a true love that can't be extinguished. In fact, I've never seen a couple so old that still so passionately loves each other. Carolyn's funny. She's always touching Dave. Also, Carolyn's always telling me and Liz that we need to have more babies. And it doesn't come from lack of experience on her end. She's had 6, so clearly they've had a busy marriage. But they've been married almost 60, or over 60 years. I think 67, 68 years. You don't just get there because you decided to get by. What happens? They had a love that just kept going, kept going, kept going. What happens? By the way, like how he describes it to coals, what happens if you stop putting fuel on the fire? It goes out. Now, many waters can't quench it, but what happens if you stop feeding it? It goes out. Which means as long as you feed the love, guess what nobody can do to it? Nobody can quench it. How many of you have stopped feeding the love of your marriage? Where it's like, well, that burning, it'll just keep going. It'll just keep going. You know why you feel nothing in your marriage? You stop trying. And Dave and Carolyn are a wonderful example because, man, they still love each other. They're still all over each other. I'm sure stuff does not work like it used to, but they're still all over each other. They're still doing all the things that married people do. I don't say it to be inappropriate. I say it to mean there's no reason why you should not be that when you're old. And I know that we can blush at certain things, but you want to know what a godly marriage looks like? You want to know what a coal that's on fire that cannot be quenched looks like? It's that. And by the way, the thing that you'll never hear them do, you'll never hear them complain about each other. You'll never hear them talk bad about each other. You'll never hear them not pursue each other. They're always talking about the things that they're doing for each other, about how much they enjoy each other, all the things they enjoy about each other. You know why? That's what's happened in Song of Solomon. It's not just the sexual relationship. It's the, I love this, and I love that, and they're this, and they're that. And Carolyn's always like, Dave's my rock. And Dave's always like, I don't know what I do without Carolyn because I don't know how to do anything, right? That's kind of what he says. Why they're constantly, lifting each other up with their words, which is why I think very much they love each other. And again, that love has been evidenced with lots of kids, lots of grandkids, lots of great-grandkids who are now having great-great-grandkids. Okay, it's just multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. You can't buy it. You can't extinguish it. And again, it's evidence of a faithful desire toward the other concerning their body, soul, and spirit. And by the way, those things don't go away. There's still a care. There's still a love. There's still all of those things. And finally, this isn't in this book, but it's true from Solomon's life. A faithful marriage must be consistently cultivated to experience Solomon's song. And his own life is a testament to this. Clearly, at some point, Solomon stops putting coals in the fire of his marriage. He starts to marry other women. And it turns his heart from God. It turns his heart from so many good things, which shows you, too, you can experience a marriage so good and so wonderful and still lose it. Again, often when I hear people say, this has happened to several people in church, they're like, how many years have you been married this year? They'll say 26. I said, oh, that's cool. My parents got divorced at 26 years. Had to put a damper on their 26 years of marriage. But it doesn't take that long to go from a happy marriage to a not happy marriage. My parents took about 6 months. Again, a fire goes out rather quick if you don't fuel it. And so if you don't tend to the fire every day, it goes out. Judy and Mike used to burn wood at their house for their fuel to heat in the winter. Every morning and evening, guess what Mike got to go out and do? He got to load the fire, because it's not Judy's job. And so She would go out and cut wood too, but yeah, 5-year-old every once in a while. You're reading her cookbook too while you're at it. But every day, guess what happens if they don't go out and put more fuel on the fire? Guess what they won't have? Heat and warmth. And by the way, if you don't have heat in your house, it's a miserable place, isn't it? And if you don't have love in your marriage, it's a miserable place. What about Christ, though? Now that we've seen ourselves, we see the importance of an emotional relationship, a sexual relationship, spiritual relationship. And Song of Solomon, Christ is typified by Solomon, and Christ is the one who's presented as our completer. Right? He's our Shulamah to our Shulamit. Right? We're the female, he's the male, and while we really bring nothing to him, he still loves us. So he's our completer who chooses us regardless of our own perceived lack of beauty. By the way, have you ever wondered, why does Jesus love me? I am this. I'm black with sin. Why does Jesus love me? And yet Jesus finds beauty in us, who loves us with an unfailing love, right? I am his, he is mine. In fact, we sing that song, I am his, he is mine, Jesus knows my name, lovingly, tenderly, always the same. So he loves us with an unfailing love that never goes away, who possesses us as we are now part of him. I am his, he is mine. Who matures in us a desire to love him, right? He doesn't have to be the one to pursue us. We now learn to love him anyways. And we do that because he first loved us. And he first pursued us. And by the way, that's what a healthy marriage looks like. And it's a healthy marriage because that's what Christ has already done for us. And again, marriage ultimately is a picture of what? Christ and his church. It means a healthy marriage is one that's in unity, that enjoys intimacy, that enjoys closeness, that enjoys faithfulness, that enjoys security. Not wondering if the other loves the other, but knowing exactly what we are because what? We're faithful. And we respond the way that we should, whenever we should. And that's when security in marriage blossoms because you know they love me because all these things are in place, these things are happening. So Christ becomes a great picture of the book. By the way, don't allegorize the rest of the book to be Christ. You get into some bizarre theology. People have done that over the years, where all of a sudden, the two things that you do when you do that, one, Song of Solomon becomes nothing about marriage, as if there's nothing in marriage about a sexual relationship, as if it's dirty. Again, the marriage bed's undefiled in marriage. It's something God ordained and something good and sacred and sweet. So don't allegorize it to where there's nothing literal here. But when they allegorize it to the extreme, too, all of a sudden you end up with all these euphemisms that become very inappropriate if you apply them to Christ. Because, again, our relationship with Christ is not presented as some bizarre relationship. It's presented in purity. It's presented in innocence. And by the way, we're his bride. The point is he hasn't yet come for us. We're betrothed, but the marriage is not what yet? It's not yet consummated. That's the whole point. We're waiting for what? Our groom to come. And we'll have what? The marriage supper of the Lamb. Why? Because it's the marriage supper. And we're now what? We're now together. And we've waited so long. And such a good to look forward to be with him. Theological focus, though, in Song of Solomon, God is seen as the originator and designer of marriage, showing that he has designed all that marriage is for intimacy and joy. By the way, isn't it good to have a good marriage? And doesn't it suck to have a bad marriage? Yeah, and we've all been on both sides of that. If you haven't lived long enough, okay? Sorry, I know you guys are still in the honeymoon period. It gets worse. I'm just joking. I'm joking. Yeah, every year. Renew the vows every year. Maybe that's a secret. Maybe I should have done that. I feel like every time I do a wedding, that's my vow renewal right there. I feel guilt and shame, and it's like, God, forgive me. I should just go to a wedding every week. It would take too long, though. They last forever. But the marriage he has designed is to be enjoyed for his glory, reflecting his love for us. That's ultimately what we're showing in marriage. We're showing the faithfulness of Christ, the love of Christ, the closeness we have with Christ. And again, that's what it teaches us, is this is what it's like to be with him. It's this joy, it's this closeness, it's this thing we've anticipated all along. And we don't know why he loves us, but he does. And we don't understand why he's faithful to us, but he is. And at the end of it all, we love him because he first loved us. Are any questions about Song of Solomon? I apologize if I was too far for the parents. You can yell at me afterwards. I tried not to, but it is Song of Solomon. So I'm sorry that this just happened to be the providential week while they were in here. It was not my plan. I forgot. I could have skipped a book, but maybe it's good for them. I don't know. But you can lecture on me afterwards if it was not, and I will apologize because I would feel bad if it was bad. Any questions? Yeah. Jason. Oh, yeah. Yeah. When I go on Twitter, there's a Twitter page that calls something called Reddit Lot or Reddit something, and it's making fun of things on Reddit. And it pops up with these people that, unfortunately, you look at their lives and it kind of breaks your heart because their lives, it's such an important part of marriage. And what you see is then people open up to polyamory. That's what they're doing, actually. When all that's dead and done, they do is that's when they excuse to have a polyamorous relationship and say, we're going to open our marriage up. And we're going to just have boyfriends and girlfriends on the side. We're just going to pool our finances. And by the way, marriage is more than pooling your finances. Marriage is you being one in every area of life. And so it is kind of sad that that is a reality for a lot of people, that people do struggle with that. And as a result, our culture is going more and more in that direction. By the way, that's what you see online. Women think that men are pigs, and they're not worthy of their love, and that all men that want is sex. And then men are frustrated because they feel like women don't want them at all. And so there is this battle in our culture where we have a very skewed view of marriage because we don't understand what the true intimacy in marriage capstones in, which is a sexual relationship. Sorry, thank you. I felt the need to vindicate myself there. So, all right. Any other questions or comments about Song of Solomon? It is a wonderful book. I hope I didn't make you too uncomfortable, but I hope that you understand what marriage is supposed to be. And it shouldn't make you blush because you should have a good marriage. And if you blush because you're a teenager, that's a good thing because you should be innocent. So I hope that you did blush a little bit because I don't want you to know everything in the world. All right. Well, we'll go to our prayer time. And everybody's talking about what I should